So, Sargon made a video, Is the Matrix a Trans Film? I think Jake covered this. We're probably not going to do the whole thing, or even most of it. It's an hour and a half long, and I cannot deal with that much Sargon. But let's see. And here's my opinion on it, okay? It depends on how you're reading the text, right? There are different ways of reading the text, and in any medium, whether it's a movie or a book, the text just means the content of the piece of art. So there are different ways to look at a movie. Is The Matrix a trans film? Well, if you're looking at it from the lens and analyzing the text from a lens of authorial intent, that being the intent the authors had for that work, then yes. The Wachowski sisters, who, when The Matrix came out, were going by the Wachowski brothers, turns out, when they made The Matrix, were both in the closet trans women. So a lot of the things and themes of The Matrix are about taking the red pill, and taking the red pill is basically a metaphor for, hey, figuring out that something's not right, you know? You're not like the rest of people, you're trans. It's like cracking your egg, basically. So The Matrix, in its themes, in its writing, has trans themes, and the intent of the author, whether they even realized it or not, definitely comes down to, yeah, there's like trans stuff in it. If we're talking about other ways of reading the text of a film, though, different. If you're a firm believer in death of the author, which I would consider myself on that side, basically that says that fucking authorial intent. I do not care what the author meant when they wrote this story. What I care about is what people get out of it when they watch it. And you can analyze that from, various viewpoints. There's, feminist film theory, there's auteur theory, there's all sorts of different ways of looking at right? At movies or books or whatever. Lindsay Ellis has a good series on this called The Whole Plate, in which she analyzes the Transformers films from various different schools of film analysis thought. So, from everything from like feminist theory to auteur theory to critical race theory, all that kind of stuff. So check it out. She's really great. However, I have a feeling Sargon isn't going to get that academic with his analysis here. I haven't watched this video. I have a feeling he's just going to be like, it's not, because actually, no, it's not. Could be wrong, but let's see what Sargon has to say about The Matrix being a trans film.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
I think I might be live. I haven't got the chat, though.
Here's an interview one of the sisters did.
Hello, Lily Wachowski here. I'm glad that people are talking about the movies, the Matrix movies, with a trans narrative. I love that how meaningful those films are to trans people, and the way that they come up to me and say, these movies saved my life.
Squid with 300 bits and Highly and Derp with 100 bits. Highly and Derp says, I've seen it pointed out that at the time the movie was released, the most common form of HRT for trans women was red, and one of the most common antidepressants was blue. Oh, I didn't know that. Squid with 300 bits says, what will shock Sargon is that the authorial intent coming out after the fact doesn't actually have to take away from personal experience of a text and what you took from it and what it means to you, because different people read every text in different ways, yeah?
Because when you talk about transformation, specifically in the world of science fiction, which is just about imagination, it's like, and world building, and like the idea of the seemingly impossible becoming possible, I think is like, that's why it speaks to them so much. And I'm grateful that I can be a part, throwing them a rope to help them along their journey.
He reacts to this on his stream. Okay, we can just watch his stream then.
But I have announced it on Parler, so you can't come at me for that. Yeah. Oh wow. Okay. Streamlabs went live for once. That's nice. Normally it requires that I do something in the background. So, chat, how are you doing? It's lovely to be back, to be honest, and to be able to make videos and live streams from the comfort of my studio, my mini studio. But yeah, no, how's it going, everyone? It's good to see you all, and good to see that you're doing very well. Yeah, so, I don't know whether you've noticed, but The Matrix is a trans film, chaps.
That is the intent of the authors and directors. Yeah.
And I've got to say, right, this very much in the theme of, you know, J.K. Rowling coming out and declaring Dumbledore and everyone else to be gay.
No. Sargon, that's not the same thing. Because the text of Harry Potter, at least not until the later books when they talk about his relationship with Grindelwald, don't have a ton in terms of content that could be read that way. It's certainly there when they talk about Dumbledore's relationship with Grindelwald, but again, a lot of that comes from J.K. Rowling after the fact. It's not something that's inherent to the text. The Matrix, on the other hand, it's very clear that that's what they were going for the whole time, especially with the benefit of hindsight. In fact, one of the characters, I think their name was Switch, was originally going to be a trans character that outside of the Matrix they were going to be presenting one way, and then inside the Matrix, because your Matrix, you know, body is based upon how you see yourself internally, was going to be different. So there was going to be an explicitly trans character, but I think Warner Brothers basically nixed that at the last minute. So, Carl, not the same thing.
You know, there's nothing that Hagrid likes more than getting a sausage up the wrong end and things like this. So that's very interesting, JK. Thank you for telling us all of this. There may well be more legitimacy to the idea that The Matrix is a trans film.
Yes.
This might not actually be something that's just obviously stapled on post hoc.
Correct, it's not. Sargon, I don't mean to be, you know, overly critical, but before you make your smug live stream where you're like, Sargon of Accord here, let me tell you why The Matrix actually isn't a trans film. Shouldn't you have looked this up first? Shouldn't you have done even a little bit of research prior, you know, before you, like, tried to be all smug on stream about it? Just, you know.
And, you know, we've got to be fair about this. We've got to be fair about all of the evidence. And the thing is, I don't really think it changes the main underlying value or message of The Matrix either.
What the fuck? What is that even supposed to imply? Of course it doesn't. And again, Sargon, I'm not in favor of authorial intent. I don't really care. If you get something different out of The Matrix, that's great. I'm happy for you. I think anyone can read just about any text and reasonably get almost anything out of it in terms of, like, messages, themes, whatever, as long as you back up your assertion with your explanation as to why you feel that way, then there's probably a valid reason for it. But, like, if we're talking about the intent of the authors, which it seems like that is your purpose going into this, because you're talking about J.K. Rowling and her stuff in regard to, like, Dumbledore being gay, or, like, Hermione being black, as she said later, even though in the book it's, like, mentioned that her complexion isn't, like, dark. Like, whatever. That's a conversation about authorial intent. So if you're talking about authorial intent, then the authors have said, hey, this is what we were going for. As Compu, doing research would require him to comprehend the concept that he could be wrong. That's true. I've made a grave error in assuming that Sargon thinks he can ever be wrong after he has an initial thought in his head.
Because the thing with such a broad allegory is that you could apply it to anything, which is why the phrase red pill really stuck around for being shown the world as it really is. You know, not staying in the comfortable bubble of that which is believed to be true by all because of consensus.
Jesus Christ, his chat is a nightmare.
Facts. And when you start framing it like that, because that's what it was supposed to be, assuming that it wasn't just another trap, that you were in, you know, another simulation after you drop out. Again, the main question...
With 5 bits, Tatsuyo Dragneel says, I said this on Jake's stream, but J.K. Rowling was able to put whatever she wanted into her books, but something like this, the creators have studio executives preventing them from doing stuff. Like Korra, they wanted to do lesbian couples since season 1, but Nick wouldn't let them till the last second at the very end of the series, or for example, for lesbian Velma in the one Scooby-Doo show. Yeah. Stop, chat. Not you, his chat. His chat's awful.
Underlies the Matrix is actually not a new one. It's a very old one. And it really is, how do I know what I know? How do I know what I know is real? And the answer is, you don't. You are relying on your senses. And if you happen to be like a brain in a vat, and computer electrodes and whatever were connected up to the various sensory receptors in your brain, not the organs themselves, you wouldn't have any senses, but just made your brain think that you had sensory organs, and the information that sensory organs was given to you by a computer, you'd think you were operating in the real world, and you'd have no real way to prove it unless you could find what we can, I suppose, term glitches in the Matrix, like deja vu as a cat walks past twice and things like this. That's why it's such a good film. It was a really well packaged version of that philosophical conundrum, and the exploration of what the real world could be was really interesting. I know it's the BBC said that they were aliens, but no, I believe they were machines, and they'd taken over the world, and they were using humans as batteries, basically. I don't know how feasible that is, but, who cares? It doesn't matter,
It's not feasible. Thermodynamics basically says that would not work, Sargon. I think the original idea was that the human brain was going to be used as a processor for the computers, but the studio made them change it to batteries because they didn't think people would understand what a processor was. Again, the movie came out in the year 2000 or 1999, so...
It's the thought-provoking nature of the film that's interesting, the scientific validity of machines that have enslaved humanity. But that was why it was so good. It was a good presentation of an old theme that was done really well, and it had some really... I'm not like some sort of camera techie guy or anything, but it had some amazing action and really innovative camera techniques. You'll see the bullet time stuff that the Matrix popularized, and the kind of aesthetic of it was really different because, in the 90s, I would generally describe the aesthetic of the 90s as something like a cross between Top Gun and Saved by the Bell, right? Everything was kind of clean cut and wholesome, and looking back I deeply miss it. But the good thing about the Matrix, and as you can see from the picture we've got up, is that it's aged really well. It still looks classy and edgy and...
Oh god, Carl, no. This has nothing to do with the transphobia that's probably going to transpire in this video, but who looks at... Oh no. Who looks at the Matrix and goes, oh yes, classy. Look how classy they are and how edgy. I've seen people make fun of how edgy they're trying to be, but like... long black trench coats, leather and sunglasses. Classy. Oh no, Carl, no. It is not aged well. Please stop. He did not hang out in the same 90s that I did. All the grunge, yeah. The Matrix aesthetic has not aged well.
Interesting and futuristic, which is difficult for things to do. Demolition Man didn't age nearly this well. And really RoboCop and all these sort of things.
Why is Demolition Man your go-to? And why RoboCop? RoboCop came out like a decade earlier. Of course it didn't age as well. I'd imagine in the 2030s, The Matrix is going to age even worse. And even then, The Matrix more or less takes place mostly in what appears to be the present of when it happened, the world of the Matrix, which is supposed to be in like the 90s, even though of course it is the future and people don't know it. Like when they're on the Nebuchadnezzar and stuff, they're just in like, ragtag, put together crappy clothes because it's the apocalypse basically. So of course that's going to age relatively well, because things look kind of dirty and grungy. They're kind of trying to repair things as they go. Like, that ages relatively well. This did not age well.
The Ed 209 in RoboCop just looks awful. And I remember watching RoboCop when I was really quite young.
I don't know about that one. I think Ed 209 has aged better than The Matrix, because The Matrix is like a style of fashion. It's like, ooh, look at us, we're so edgy in our leather trench coats. The Ed 209, if we made some sort of autonomous land-walking military vehicle today, I don't think it would look that off from this, right? Like, it just looks like a tank with legs. I don't think this has aged more poorly than The Matrix. It's gonna be an opinion, though, obviously. Even in, here's the Ed 209, I think, from the remake. Even that, it maintained more or less the same structure. The aesthetic was a little bit different, but, like, I don't think it's that out of place, you know? It just looks like military hardware. It's matte, it's metal, it's got thick panels on it. I think that looks better than The Matrix in terms of datedness.
I don't recall noticing how bad the special effects
Yeah, Ed 209 when it moved was stop motion.
are in Ed 209. But The Matrix hasn't aged badly at all. It's not brilliant. It's not perfect. Like, you can, when you rewatch it, you can see that the shadows in the reflection in Morpheus's glasses is put on artificially. It's not done from the real camera. But I mean, you would expect, but it's that you can tell, if you look back on it now with modern eyes. But they're really small things, really, and the overall execution of the film was light years ahead of anything else at the time, and it was really, really interesting. And I was in my first year of uni when this came out, and it was viral. Everyone was captivated by it, and I totally understood why. But yeah, so the concept of the red pill and the blue pill are, again, epic concepts. They're the sort of concepts that can apply to anything. Said why? Pill being told comforting lies, as Cypher chose when he decided to go back into the Matrix, because at the end of the day, he doesn't know he's not eating a steak, does he? And you think, well, that's a good argument, isn't it? He doesn't. Well, if you don't know, what difference does it make? You may as well be eating that steak if you think you are eating that steak, because that's all you've got to go on anyway. Really, is the patterning in your brain and the reactions in your brain. So and that looked like a good-looking steak, so I can understand why he was like, no, I'm going back in. Life on the outside is awful, because it does look awful. And I'll just set me up as someone successful, and I'll live out a happy life in a digitally created fantasy world. But the Matrix itself, as a film, is a really well executed film, and the allegory in it is not a new one, and it's just a very well executed one.
Sure.
But this is, I guess, what they would say surface level interpretations.
Yeah.
And I think we do have to take the question of whether it is an allegory of transgenderism specifically seriously, given how the Wachowski brothers, who are the directors of it, and now the Wachowski sisters, they have both transitioned. The first one in 2012, Lana Wachowski, transitioned in 2012, and Lily Wachowski transitioned in 2016. So I think it would be quite foolish to say, no, there's absolutely no chance of this being a trans film. There's bound to be, right? It's come out of the minds of two transgender people, and Lily Wachowski describes it as a closeted...
At least he's, naming them correctly. That's good.
...film, which I find interesting, because, I think that's probably true, right? There's probably some truth to that. And there is a bit of... I don't want to just call it gender bending, because it sounds dismissive or, irrational almost, but there's definitely sorry, I'm gonna blow my nose. We've got an unbelievable heat wave here at the moment. It's driving my hay fever nuts. But yeah, so there's gender ambiguity in it. Trinity isn't the most ladylike of ladies.
Oh my god.
You've got a couple of...
That's not part of the trans narrative in The Matrix, just because she has short hair, Sargon. My god.
I can't remember the names of them, but
There's
like,
nothing
the
funny
supporting
about
Like,
characters.
out of
Tools
all the
capitalism.
characters he could have picked, like, Switch, who was the one that was going to be trans in the original script. But no, he picks just a lady who has short hair. My god. Yeah, at least he's not dead naming, I agree.
There's a woman with short blonde hair that gets killed. And a few other sort of supporting characters who nobody else cares about, but
Women with short hair or pixie cuts are apparently all trans now. Good to know.
have been widely reported on and expanded in the lore afterwards. Because why not? There's just something there. But yeah, so this is something I think we have to take seriously, and I don't think that they're wrong.
He
But let's
took a
have look
thumb
at
hit
things
on
seriously.
camera?
Or after everybody else
Where?
gets of the he's busy. My hate.
Was that when he blew his nose? You have no...
We've got an unbelievable heap. Generally,
I literally didn't see anything there that implies that, and I'm
about
pretty
the way
sure
that this
Sargon
goes.
does coke, but I have no
but
evidence
I tell you
to
what,
that.
I figured we'd take this as a fairly easygoing stream, so we wouldn't pile on too hard, and it's just be a nice, relaxing Saturday evening stream where we just chill out and enjoy some post hoc rationalizations and some real goddamn stretches. As Aya says, it's so annoying to having people think you're a right-wing partisan because you keep pointing out how the left is demonstrably going insane and violent. Yeah, well, I mean, the question really is, do you hate the communists or do you hate the Republicans?
Republicans, definitely.
And I don't hate the Republicans, but I do despise what the communists want.
Oh no, a society where people aren't taken advantage of by their bosses. Can't have that.
I can't agree with it. Orwell's Timple Magabini says, "Man, my weekly readings for class were postmodernism. A subset of my suicide red pilling of my future students will be to leave my class thinking postmodernism is being why doing it from what you credible." Harrion says, "I have to think on more." Another person, we need to anymore. It's going to be really well.
Read the article. I don't want to
so
hear about your shitty
it's
chat.
4 years ago now. Both of the Wachowski sisters were transgender, but it's about 13 years and 17 years, respectively, after the release of The Matrix. So, if I think that if they are going to say that The Matrix is a transgender film, I do agree that it has to really be considered to be closeted. And I don't think
Sure,
that you can
it's subtext,
erase...
Carl. Do you understand how subtext in film works? And again, it's not like there's one objective interpretation. That's not what's being said. What they're talking about here specifically is like authorial intent. They're talking about the fact that these two transgender women put these themes in the movie, and when they did so, they were specifically thinking about their struggle with their gender identities. Right? That doesn't mean you can't have a different interpretation. If you think that the red pill is about some other bullshit, great. Good for you. No one's saying you can't have that interpretation, but it can be helpful to be like, here's why the author authored this the way they did. And that's what they're talking about when they're talking about transgender themes in The Matrix.
The brain in a vat analogy from it either. It's got to be tied into that too. What do we have? Oh, no, this is just a statement on being transgender. So I read about half the statement and it was boring me because essentially what it was a very rich and famous film director finds a way to call themselves oppressed. It's okay. Well, I'm sorry that you're trapped in the wrong body with millions of dollars. I guess I'm glad that I'm not.
Yeah, you're just a douchebag with almost $1 million.
So, let's have a look at some of the arguments. Now, the arguments for The Matrix being a transgender film are actually not new ones. These are actually, they don't go back too far. I've got, 2019 and, what was this one? 2019. But the Vulture one I've got here is the first one, back in February.
I would think there'd be articles at least discussing it going back at least to when Lily Wachowski came out. Because obviously, you know, someone who directed and wrote The Matrix, which is a story about sort of coming to terms with reality being discongruent with, you know, what you're seeing every day. Seems like people are going to be like, oh, was this related? You know, is you being trans related to some of the themes in The Matrix? I'm sure it came out, you know, sometime at least post 2014 when Lily came out.
February. And given that both the Wachowski sisters have transitioned, my lawyer tells me I'm legally obligated to use the term. What, chap? You jumped down my throat. No, I'm joking. By the way, that's not true. That was just a joke. But yeah, shit, I interrupted myself. Now I can't remember what I was going to say. But anyway, let's see what their argument is. Oh yeah, no, it's not surprising that they're like, right, okay, we're going to have to impose our ideology on the Matrix because we need to essentially welcome these filmmakers into the fold. I mean, why wouldn't you want prestigious films like The Matrix as part of your ideological activism? You of course would. That's what.
Sargon, it is what it is. Like, this isn't about some strategic move to turn The Matrix into an exclusively trans film. If you read different things into The Matrix, that's fine. What we're talking about here is the specific themes and ideas that were written into it by the authors. That's a different conversation than how you perceive those themes. If you see other things in those themes, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it makes sense to say, okay, the directors and writers of this movie are trans. So, it makes sense, let's read this as a trans narrative, because they've even said that a lot of these themes and ideas come from that underlying issues they were having at the time about their gender identity. It makes sense to read the film that way.
A lot of other people use the red pill, blue pill metaphor. It is a valid one. But trans women have
Dark
claimed
Art
the
Zero,
Matrix
thanks for
as an
following.
allegory for gender transition since at least 2012, when Lana Wachowski publicly came out as a trans woman while doing press for the film Cloud Atlas. The symbolism is easy to find. Thomas Anderson's double life, he's a hacker by night, and his chosen name Neo, and his vague but maddening sense that something is off about the world, a splinter in your mind, Morpheus calls it. Neo has dysphoria.
Did I ever see the Wachowski sisters Netflix series? Don't remember what it's called, but I think it's relevant to the discussion. Yeah, Sense8. Baja Blast was a big fan of Sense8 and had me watch it. And it's really good. Check out Sense8. There's one of the premise of Sense8 is basically there are these things called clusters where there's like 8 people who are all mentally connected from all around the world, and there are different people who are Sense8s, and each has a different cluster, all of 8 different people, and they can like sort of share abilities with each other and like kind of take control of the other's body. So one of them's like, you know, a martial arts expert, and the other one is like a hacker, and so, you know, they pool their abilities, basically. It's a good show. And one of the main characters in that show is a trans woman. So it's really interesting. Check it out.
And the Matrix is the gender binary. The agents of transphobia, you get it. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
This is why I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say there's no subtext to it that's not this. But every application of what they're trying to put onto it post hoc just seems kind of...
It's not post hoc, Sargon. Even though they weren't out about it at the time, they were still trans in the year 1999 when they made the movie.
Desperate. I mean, if Neo has dysphoria, why does he never appear as a woman?
Because Warner Brothers didn't want any of this transgender stuff in their movie. There was going to be a trans character and they got removed, right? And again, subtext is subtext, right? It would be like, you know, the episode of Star Trek where there's the species that's half black and half white, and then the other half of the species is sort of has the colors switched, and it's clearly an allegory for racism. And they hate each other because their colors are on the wrong side. It would be like Sargon being like, oh, silly liberals, you think that this story is about racism? If this story is about racism, why doesn't a black person show up? Like, because it's an allegory, Sargon. Allegories don't necessarily just straight up show you the thing. Then it ceases being subtext and starts just being text, right?
Whereas there is like one of the, I think it's the blonde-haired woman, or one of the you know, the NPCs who jump into the Matrix with them, actually apparently does come in as a man and not a woman. So,
okay, so you recognize that, Sargon. You recognize that was something that was in the script, and then Warner Brothers took it out of the movie. I think it was the character named Switch. Let me look for sure. Switch Matrix. Yeah, it was Switch. And it was more obvious in the original script, or I don't even know if they shot it. But basically, Switch was going to be transgender, but it was the year 1999, and Warner Brother was like, no, not in our movie. Get that shit out of here. So again, just because Neo himself is not literally a trans woman doesn't mean that his journey doesn't mirror that same journey, right? That's how allegory works. It's like, imagine if someone, you know, is working themselves to the bone, and they're not, you know, they're not taking any breaks, and they're just burning themselves out, and someone goes like, slow and steady wins the race, like the tortoise and the hare, and Sargon steps in and goes, silly liberals, there is no rabbit or turtle here. Like, yeah, it's a fucking allegory, idiot. Cotton Candy 903 with 50 bits. It's the same as how Animal Farm is an allegory for the rise of communism in the Soviet Union. Yep.
Like I said, there's probably is some trans messaging in there, but why would it not actually? I mean, you can't really say Neo has dysphoria.
You can, because he literally has discomfort with the reality around him. Hold on. Ask Compu says, actually, that's another thing. He only seems to think male to female exists here and seems to ignore female to male. True. And actual Jake, hi, says, Sargon should have named Neo Tran if he wanted your message to be clear. Yeah. Sargon's very strange.
If Neo doesn't transition.
He does, though, Sargon. It's a fucking metaphor. Sargon... what's his name? Morpheus is like, you know something is wrong. I'm not doing this verbatim. I haven't seen The Matrix in a while. You know something is wrong about the world. You feel it. You sense it. You wake up and you know it. Whatever. That's mirroring the experience of a trans individual. They aren't literally talking about it as a trans, like, character, because that's how allegory works, and Warner Brothers wouldn't let a side character be trans in 1999, much less the star of the movie.
Right? He seems to be a straight white man throughout the entire trilogy. It seems more that
I'm watching The Twilight Zone, and people say this episode is about not seeing people for being ugly, but they're all pig-faced people, so this doesn't count. Where are all the normal people?
It was about casting him as a Jesus-style figure, doesn't it? Like a kind of Superman savior for the Matrix, and it, like in the other two.
Let me see if I can find more examples to make fun of Sargon for. Famous allegory episodes. Let me see if they're... I don't even know if that's allegory in fiction. TV tropes. Here we go. Let me see if we can find films. Star Wars, the prequel trilogy, especially Revenge of the Sith, is an allegory for the Nazis' rise to power. Chancellor Palpatine being Hitler, and Obi-Wan and Anakin being Goring brothers, with the latter also representing all Germans. But wait a minute, silly liberals. There are no National Socialists from 1930s Germany in the Star Wars. What are you talking about? If you wanted the Empire to be Nazis, why weren't they wearing swastikas? Snorts cocaine.
Films which I don't really want to talk about because they were shit.
Wait, he thinks the fascist government and Starship Troopers are the good guys? Oh no, Sargon, you fucking idiot. Does he not know it's directed by Paul Verhoeven and that he's making fun of fascism? Holy shit.
It definitely seems that they were more going for the Jesus Christ Savior metaphor than the metaphor of Neo is trans. The Matrix is the gender binary. Well, you could frame that. I can buy that. You can say that you know, if you were adopting the trans position, you could say, well, we're programmed
adopting the trans position. What the fuck does that mean? You mean the authorial intent? The authorial intent? Is that what the word you're trying to say there?
Except that there are two genders and there can't be anything else, and there's no switching between them. These are hard-coded, and
That would be an incorrect worldview. That would be factually incorrect. I know this. Do you know how I know this? Because I am trans, Sargon.
there are people with something called gender dysphoria who
Correct?
do have a problem in this regard. So you could say that that's the case. That could be a fair analogization of it. And the agents are transphobia. Okay, yeah, I can see that too. You know, the
See, I would put more the agents as sort of social expectations. You know what I mean? You see this, for instance, when Agent Smith refuses to call Neo by his preferred name, Neo, right? He continually calls him Mr. Anderson. And that's sort of not necessarily dysphoria embodied. And again, this is going to depend on who you ask. You can, you know, say different things are different things. This is how interpretation of film works. But it seems to me it's like social expectations, which you could say embodies dysphoria, but it seems to me that it's more like people imposing these social expectations on you that you don't feel fit you and that trigger your dysphoria in general. They are the system. They are like cis heteronormativity embodied rather than dysphoria itself. Could be wrong, though. I don't know. Just my feeling. Ask Compu says, Sargon needs to stop hogging all the wrongness, leave some from other people. And Cotton Candy 903 says, this is so aggravating.
when they say transphobia, what they mean is the policing mechanisms of the thing to prevent people from, jumping out of the system. But the thing is, that's such a broad reading of the world of the Matrix, right? You've got to you could apply that to almost anything.
And you're free to do so. If you apply, like, death of the author to a text, that's fine. But that's not what's being talked about here. It's talking about authorial intent in terms of the Wachowski sisters, two trans women who wrote and directed the movie, right?
You could apply what you're talking about is just a description of a system, and then applying that to anything.
Do you understand how reading text works, Sargon? Even when you're not talking about authorial intent, if you read something into, like, I don't know, Lord of the Rings as a narrative about, like, World War II or something, and I think some people have claimed, like, they asked Tolkien while he was still alive, is Lotor about World War II? And I think he said something about, like, I find allegory detestable. But I think he also said, if you want to read that into it, that's fine, but don't assume that I've put it there, right? So you can read things into a film, and that's what the different sort of ways of analyzing film are for, right? Whether you're looking at things through a feminist film critique theory, or like critical race theory, or auteur theory, you can apply all sorts of different readings to a text. None are necessarily the correct one. Specifically here, though, we're talking about the fact that the two directors and writers are trans women. So what does that mean when we read The Matrix from that lens? That's what it's about. No one's telling you you can't read whatever you want into The Matrix. I don't care. Like, it's a movie. It's a piece of art. Read whatever you want into it. But when you're talking about authorial intent, you have to broach the subject of the transness of the people who made it.
You could probably apply this to working in a warehouse. You know, it's like, I don't have to work in a warehouse. I could do something else, but my boss is an agent who's trying to get me to not quit working at the warehouse because he needs my work. You know, you really could apply this very, very broadly. But this is where they've kind of got us on this one, right? And then there's the red pill itself. Less a metaphor for hormone therapy than a literal hormone. Many have pointed out online that back in the 90s, prescription estrogen was in fact red.
That's interesting, because the estrogen I take is blue, so I take the blue pill every day.
Okay, yeah, derived in Matrix-like fashion from the...
Actually, that's untrue. I actually got a different brand now that isn't even the blue, like, ovular one. Now I just have a circular white estrogen pill. I don't know why they switched, but, like, it's the same thing. It's just, I think, from a different manufacturer. But a lot of current estrogen meds are those blue, like, ovular pills. Estrogen pill. Yeah, so this is the one I used to take. Looks like this. It's a blue pill. And then I think I'm taking more of the white one now. It's not exactly this, but now I'm taking a white one. Let me see if I can find ones from the 90s. Estrogen pill. 90s? Is that a thing that's going to come up? Oh, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Look at Premarin, a 90s estrogen pill, and they're like red pills that are like the exact same thing as from the Matrix. Holy shit. They're like even the same shape. Oh, interesting. Look at that.
Urine of pregnant mares. Oh, that sounds delicious. Came in a smooth chocolatey maroon. Twitter users now gleefully brandish this fact as well. Actually, tip style rejoined as the alt-right's recent co-option.
Sargon, are you seriously making fun of the actually fedora tippers when that's entirely your brand? Like, what? Not the most self-aware individuals. Apparently cocaine blocks your brain's ability to self-reflect.
Of the red pill scene as a parable for awakening from feminist brainwash.
Because this whole stream is like, someone saying like, hey, the Wachowski sisters are trans, so let's read The Matrix as a trans narrative, and him being like, where's my glasses? I gotta use the Bones glasses for this. Actually, you can read a lot of things into a film. Actually, yeah, we know, Sargon, but that's not what we're doing right now.
Well, it is a parable from awakening from any brainwashing. It could be the brainwashing into the gender binary, or it could be feminists saying that women are most affected when in fact women are not most affected. You know, you can use it as a parable for any kind of awakening from a set of lies, because that's what it is. You know, it doesn't have to be any one.
It's weird that Sargon is saying that reading the Matrix as a trans narrative is too broad, but saying it's just a narrative about opening your eyes is somehow not broad. Saying it's a trans narrative is being very specific in how you're reading it. Saying it's just about, like, awakening to the reality of the world, that's a broad reading. What does he think broad reading means?
One particular thing. But,
does Carl actually do coke? I have no evidence for this. Let me just say that.
That's right.
None of this is evidenced. I'm not claiming Carl actively does coke. I'm not looking for a fucking lawsuit. Don't spread this like it's a real thing. Boney Jones XX, thanks for following. Carl Benjamin cocaine.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
Ask Compu, he does coke in Minecraft. I don't know. There have been things that have sort of...
There's a lot of good points in it, mostly focusing on how...
Like, hey, I've never snorted cocaine. I've never had the want to snort cocaine. Any sort of upper sounds awful to me, considering I'm already way up here all the time in terms of whatever. But look at him.
There's
look
a lot
at
of
this.
good points in it.
He goes
mostly
off
focusing
screen
on how
and then he does that.
how human communicate.
Again, none of that's proof, but you know, take it as you will.
And I stress this because that's the general thrust of what's happening here. They are trying to say this is ours and not yours, as in you can't apply your narratives.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Sargon, do you understand how different readings work? They're talking about authorial intent, and they're also talking about just reading it as a trans narrative, specifically because of the authors. You can still read whatever you want into it, who cares?
And your experiences to the narrative of the Matrix and draw meaning from it. You're not allowed to do that. The only meaning that it is now valid to draw from the Matrix...
Literally no one has said this. Sargon is such a fucking victim constantly. He's like, wait a minute, they're saying that you can read into this as a trans narrative? They're telling me I can't read into mine! Jesus, Sargon. No, that's not what anyone is saying.
Is our trans narrative. And I don't agree. I agree that there could well be a trans narrative to it. But I also think that there are other things. And thankfully, I think Lily Wachowski said as much. We'll go through more in a minute. But anyway, see, this one thing, there's something to this kind of reclamation. See my point? They don't want you to have it. They want
No one is telling you not to like The Matrix or to read your own themes into it. Why are you victimizing yourself when no one is telling you you can't do this? He's just like, what can I be mad about today? Well, these people are reading The Matrix as a trans narrative. Well, I better pretend that they're telling me I can't have my own reading now.
jealously guarded against you. This is ours and not yours. Go away, normal, you know? It's like, sorry, it's a
Thrash
film,
Mio with
and
100 bits.
I
They're trying to
probably
take
enjoyed
our
this
red
film before
pill
the author of
away.
This was even walking, you know? Like, how old is the person who wrote this, you know?
Would it matter? Do I need to be as old as, like, Tolkien to do a critical reading of Lord of the Rings? That's not how anything works, Sargon, you fucking boomer. You don't get to say, well, I was there on opening night. I have the true... No. Anyone can read any text and apply some sort of reading to it.
Taken seriously, it suggests that the Red Pillar's present resentment of immigrants, black people, and queers. What? Jesus! I thought we were talking about the Matrix.
They're talking about people like you, Sargon, and how MGTOW people, or incels, will use the red pill as an allegory for waking up to what they deem to be reality, and that reality is often incredibly sexist, xenophobic, homophobic, all those sorts of things.
But right, okay. So now, right, okay, calm down.
Calm down. Sargon, they're calm. They're pointing out your position. I'm sorry that you're embarrassed by the people on your side, but here we are.
And this is no metaphor, a sadistic expression of his own gender dysphoria.
Apparently there's a link. One second, let me see what this link is. I don't want to get DMCA'd for that.
I'm glad that it did.
Oh, that's the Wachowski sister.
He is, after all, an abortive man, a beta trapped in an alpha's body. Oh, man. If you're a beta, you're no longer a man. The only men that really exist are like hulking alphas.
I mean, I've literally covered MGTOWs often on this channel who espouse that worldview. I agree, it's funny and it's ridiculous, but like, yeah, these people out here on the internet, they believe that shit, and they use the red pill as an allegory for it.
Man, that's rough. That's rough. That's pretty high standard, man. I mean, I'm all for enforcing a gender binary, but I mean...
Imagine saying that unironically and not thinking you're a shitbag. I'm all for telling people who they can and can't be based upon the genitals they're born with. Great. Thanks, Sargon.
You could soften your standards a bit, you know? But anyway, we're strawmanning our opponents. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to steelman my opponents, which is why I have to concede that yes,
You've never steelmanned your opponent ever, Sargon. Stop. And they're not strawmanning you. Literally, incels and MGTOW people use the term red pill to describe their worldview that women are shit and that all men are either alphas or betas, right? This is shit that exists online in right-wing cesspits. I cover them all the time.
Film made by two transgender people probably does have some at least unconscious underlying trans messaging in it.
I don't think it's super unconscious.
But anyway,
some of
those
it
around
might
him
be,
assume he
but
is a
I think
leader,
it was pretty
provider,
intentional.
President. But his greatest fear is that they are mistaken. He radicalizes, shoots up a school, builds all... What the fuck are you talking about? In order to avoid transitioning. The way some closeted trans women join the military in order to get the girl beaten out of them. What the fuck are you talking about? This is... Are they trying to describe what the sort of...
As Compu
right-wing
says,
red
the two
pill
genders,
view
steel
is?
man
Because
and
that's
straw
pretty
man.
extreme. But let's face it, allegorically is the least interesting way to read anything.
What?
No, that's the interesting bit, because otherwise we just have the literal interpretation, and literally I don't think that a guy called Morpheus
Yeah, I agree. That's a stupid line from the article.
red pilled a guy called Neo. Nothing ruins a question like an answer. The world is weird in that. Consider, for instance, the comedy or shut up.
What? Boy, oh boy, Sargon, what substantive fucking commentary. Reading the article. Shut up, article. Okay, then don't read it. Why are you doing the stream? What are we here for, Sargon?
That's literally it, isn't it? So, talking about the lozenge, I take a blue pill twice a day, once in the morning, and then once before back to bed before sending myself back into the dream. In this version of the story, the hidden trans woman is not Neo but Cypher, the Nebuchadnezzar's own Judas, who agrees to hand over Morpheus. Now, so let's look at our trans allegory then. If the agents are transphobia, they're agents of transphobia, the gender binary is the Matrix, then what is Morpheus? Cypher, sorry, a detransitioner? I can only...
Not necessarily. I think it's more that Cypher is a trans person, if you're going to read it from this lens. Cypher is basically someone who has recognized that they have this dysphoria, but instead of transitioning, they're going to hide it and decide to live their lives in the lie anyway, because they think it'll be easier for them. You see this in his scene where he's talking about, like, this steak tastes real, and it tastes real enough to me, and that's good. Because, again, staying in the closet, in a lot of ways, can be easier for trans people. I absolutely recognize that. But that doesn't make it good or better for you, right? So that's more the allegory there. It's that Cypher is basically denying the fact that as a trans person, again with this reading, that the best thing for them could be to transition, but instead is to go on living the lie. Ask Compu with some sort of something. Hold on. Men and women, hi, welcome to Chili's. The two genders. Holy shit. That's good. That's good.
Assume. I mean, she's not TERF, is she? So, yeah, it must be a detransitioner. I mean, I'm surprised that they didn't call the agents, instead of just calling them transphobia, I'm surprised they didn't call them TERFs. Some people are enforcing the gender binary. Because TERFs need to
No, TERFs aren't the only people who enforce the gender binary, so...
enforce the gender binary. If woman doesn't have a hard border against man, then the TERFs are lost. And so I'm genuinely surprised they left out that hit. They could have been punching that way. But yeah, so so Cypher is, I like the way they describe him as a Judas as well, as if he owes. You know, he didn't, well, maybe he did choose to come out of the Matrix. He did take the red pill of choice.
I mean, he is betraying his team and giving away, literally, again, Neo is basically an allegory for like a Jesus Christ figure as well. Turning him in to the machines, which are like almost demonic in how they look in these movies, you know, they're like weird squid robots and they're, you know, literally turning their Christ figure over to them in exchange for an easier life, for his 30 pieces of silver, as it were. So, yeah, it makes sense to compare him to Judas, considering that Neo is often compared to sort of a Jesus Christ figure. You see this in the first movie, in one of the first scenes. Like, Neo has a friend come over to the door, and Neo has some piece of hacker software that he hands him. And the guy's even like, "Thanks, Neo, you're my own personal Jesus Christ." Literally a quote from the movie, like, do you get it? So it makes sense to compare Cypher to Judas.
But yeah, so Cypher is a detransitioner who goes back into the gender binary. Who agrees to hand over Morpheus to the machines in exchange for being reinserted. Ignorance is bliss, he tells Agent Smith, full of juicy, non-existent steak. I don't remember nothing you understand. For to exit the Matrix is not to know the truth, but to discover the poverty of knowledge. Welcome to the desert of the real, Morpheus intones after Neo takes the red pill. There's a reason the real is a desert. What good is the truth if nothing grows there? The notion that gender was socially constructed instead of biological
Oh, shit. I clicked off it. Whoops. Oh, damn it. Where were we?
lost. And so I'm genuinely surprised they left out that. It's an empty wasteland. And you're like, yeah. Based. Like, what? That's not a preferable place to be. No wonder Cypher's like, no, just plug me back in, dude. I don't want to remember anything. Just plug me back in. It did this, perhaps, but only at the cost of the very categories into which we sought entry. Actually, that's a fair observation. As a good feminist, I know there's no such thing as a woman. As a woman, I resent this. Oh, a secret turf wrote this. Right, okay.
No, it's talking about the inherent difficulties of navigating the world in which you are both a feminist with also having the recognition that our ideas of what makes a woman in the first place are sort of constricting. That isn't necessarily a turf way of looking at things. I can understand that. Fourth wave feminism is a complicated thing, and that's not turfy to necessarily say that. I get it.
I'm saying I don't want to remember nothing.
I feel this, and it's interesting too, even as a trans woman, that's something that you deal with, because on the one hand, I know I identify as a woman and I feel more comfortable identifying that way and outwardly presenting that way. I happen to be wearing, sort of dude clothes today, but that's because I just started streaming after I got back from the store, and I'm still not super comfortable going out because I'm afraid of being assaulted. But, like, at the same time, I recognize that the idea of the gender binary that we currently have is flawed and doesn't really represent the truth of who people are. So on the one hand, you have this idea that I identify as this thing, as a woman, and on the other hand saying, what even is a woman, right? And that's complicated. It's something that everyone kind of has to work through on their own time and try and, like, understand how they're going to define these things. And even then understand that the way that you understand and define these things isn't necessarily going to be the same as everyone else around you. Because they're complicated questions without specific answers. But that doesn't make her a TERF just because she's recognizing how complicated it is to identify as something and advocate for being someone in that group while also recognizing that society's definitions of said groups are flawed.
I'm saying I don't want to remember nothing either. That's a better definition of reality than most of the things we get to forget. See, I do find this interesting. As a topic, I find this interesting. Like, I wonder where they're trying to go with it. So, not terribly convinced by the overlay of the trans analogy on top of it. I think you can definitely draw out a kind of overall narrative of someone who is pretending to be something they're not, or feels like they're something they're not, and they can't quite shake the feeling that they are, and then they go down this rabbit hole, literally following a white rabbit, in order to discover the truth about the real world, the real them. So it turns out that they're not, in fact, Mr. Anderson. They are, in fact, Neo, the transgender person. I kind of feel there's a bit of a kind of wrong reverse, a sort of wrong assignment of roles to the role of the pill, though, because the red pill is taking away that which has been constructed around you.
Correct. That being, in the case of how the Vulture article described it, the gender binary. If you're saying that the red pill is basically an allegory for transitioning, it is removing you from the construction of the gender binary that you have been placed in from your birth, right?
Not changing things to represent a new kind of reality.
No, I think you're misunderstanding. Basically what's being said here, and I'm just repeating myself at this point, but I think it's worth saying just in case someone sees this and doesn't understand what I'm saying. What we are saying is that inherently what we are assigned at birth in terms of gender, right? Obviously most people are assigned at birth the gender that matches their sex. So, for instance, when I was born, obviously applied the gender label of male to me and had all those expectations, all things that are basically manufactured, because the things that we apply to the different genders, like, they're more or less artificial. There's nothing that says, like, women, like, behave this way, men behave this way, outside of, like, certain things like hormones that cause behavioral stuff, or expectations for them. Like, look at society and how we've changed our expectations of what women could do between now and like 100 years ago. Women used to only be considered like caregivers and whatever. That was a gender expectation. Caregivers, mothers, wives. That was a gender expectation, and men were expected to go out and be the breadwinners. That was a gender expectation for them. But go to today, and we see that these things were basically constructed, you know? Women can go out and have really fulfilling careers and be excellent in their field of work. The same thing applies to a lot of the stuff we tie to gender in society, and taking the red pill, deciding to transition, is effectively saying the shackles that were placed on me by the gender I was assigned at birth and all the artificial constructed things that go along with that, I am denying that false reality and accepting the true reality that I am going to be who I am, right? So that's what it is.
You know,
Archangel 13579, thank you for subscribing.
then if you want to, so we're taking red estrogen pills, therefore the red pill is a trans thing. So yeah, but if you don't take these, then the process reverses itself and you go back to your biological state. Whereas the Matrix itself is an artificial state. You don't accidentally return into. You've got to go to great pains, as Cypher's doing, try and get back in there. So I don't think the analogy quite matches up on that degree. But, you know,
I'd like you to find one single allegory in the history of allegories that one-to-one works.
it's fine. I don't care. You know, that's not a big deal. But I think that this is all being applied post hoc, and it's a bit of a stretch in some.
There's nothing
but
funny about the tools.
Disagree. I hard disagree on that one. Something about Alex Jones?
About the past, I've been coming here since I was in high school and college, and now you guys use your COVID hoax to like set a checkpoint up so you can take over the parks and start charging. It's unconstitutional. This is not even a city ordinance. This is a illegal power grab of the people's greenbelt, and it's time to free Austin. So are you guys volunteers for the city of Austin? Who are you, masked man?
I'm a lifeguard for Barton Springs.
You're a lifeguard for Barton Springs, now part of the criminal power grab. This is outrageous criminal activity. This is the seizure of the infrastructure of Austin. It is all color of law garbage. My wife came here this morning when you cult member Coops showed up here, and you asked her, where's her reservation? Her reservation is that we live in a free country. We live in America. I call for everybody out there watching. The time for civil disobedience is here. I want this removed tonight. COVID-19 is a power grab hoax. COVID-19 is a scam. Is that your IQ? One finger? APD just did its job when a man comes up sick and I go in here, and the APD told him, no, it's not enforceable. You can go.
So ridiculous.
I do agree that there's going to definitely be these subconscious intonations. Sorry. Oh, fuck's sake, man! For you guys in the chat, it's like, oh, there's coke. Yeah, I wish. Fucking heat wave here. Absolute heat wave. In fact, I have air conditioning. Why am I using it? It's because I'm too mean. That's what it is. What are your thoughts on the use of dark sunglasses? To me, it seems to be a method of showing characters as lacking humanity, being soulless machines by obscuring the eyes. The development of the internet, the X-Files, the W's. Oh, this is like the first film with the feel. The coronavirus panic seems to have.
I'm going to get to the part where he watches one of the Wachowski sisters' videos. I'm curious what he has to say about it.
Movie directed by two Matrix recently was all for transformation, but it was coming from a closeted point of view. Should we watch this? It's 4 minutes long. I watched that earlier.
Hello, Lily Wachowski here. I'm glad that people are talking about the movies, the Matrix movies, with a trans narrative. I love that how meaningful
After that, can we Doyle? I might be done after this video. I've been going for 3 hours, 20 minutes so far. Although, did I put John Doyle in the title of this? If so, then yeah, we'll do some Doyle. If I put it in the title, I should do it. Let me see what it says. John Doyle. Oh, God, I did. Well, yeah, we'll do John Doyle after we're done with this. Sorry, I forgot I put him in the title, much less put him in the title first.
Films are to trans people in the way that they come up to me and say, these movies saved my life, because when you talk about transformation, specifically in the world of science fiction, which is just about imagination, it's like, and world building, and like the idea of the seemingly impossible becoming possible, I think is like, that's why it speaks to them so much. And I'm grateful that I can be a part, throwing them a rope to help them along their journey. I'm glad that it has gotten out that, you know, that was the original intention, but the world was...
See, I'm not sure I believe it was the original intention.
Why?
So much more
They're
that you
two
would have
trans
been-
women. Why would you not believe that? Like, what? Not only are they two trans women, one of them is literally telling you that that's the case. What reason do you have to believe that this isn't the case, Carl? And again, this isn't stopping you from reading whatever you want into it. If you want to read, you know, The Matrix as an allegory for something else, if you want to read it as an allegory for breaking through the liberal agenda, or whatever right-wing thing you want to read into it, I don't really care. You're allowed to do that. That's how reading of text works. You can read whatever you want into it. But it doesn't change the fact that it was directed and written by two trans women. So of course it makes sense that it's going to be about that.
With the film that would have actually rounded out that statement that wasn't done. So I find myself very dubious about that. That before they realized they were trans, they were like, yeah, we're going to...
Oh, God. Carl, they probably knew long before they came out. I don't know how to tell you this, Carl, but trans people know this shit before they come out. That's the reality. It's not like trans people are like, wait a minute, I'm trans, and then they come out that same day. That's not how shit works. It can take years and years and years. I say this from experience of lying to yourself and, like, trying to cope and deciding, you know, no, I can pretend and do whatever for the rest of my life because it's easier. Like, they probably knew, Carl.
going to make a trans film. Yeah, I'm not buying it. I'm totally on board with the post hoc. Well, looking back, it's a closeted film, you know, because we were closeted. Fine, makes perfect sense. But say that was the intention all along. Sorry.
Wasn't quite ready at a corporate level. The corporate world wasn't ready for it. So when you make movies and you, it's this public art form. I think any kind of art that you put out into the universe, there's a letting go process, because it's entering into like public dialogue. I like that.
And that's true. I think that's a very true point. You know, this is the thing. Like they're not going to be able to have a hegemonic narrative about film.
Right, and she's agreeing with you, Carl. That's what I don't get. I don't even understand why you made that stream. Like, everyone is agreeing with you. If you want to read a text differently than the authorial intent, you're free to do so. In fact, most readings of most texts at this point don't consider authorial intent. It's an interesting thing to know what the author intended, or if there were any themes that were intentional, but it's far from necessary to reading a text, and no one is telling you otherwise.
That's just the fact of it.
There's like an evolution process that we as human beings...
But yeah, in the chat, yeah, you, the viewer, were always trans. Yeah, I know. The J.K. Rowling stuff was just so dumb. It's like his
Sargon's realizing that no one's disagreeing with him and it's making him look like a jackass, so he's going to change the subject and rally about J.K. Rowling to make, like, don't ignore the fact that everything I've said for the past hour is completely pointless because she's agreeing with me. Let me talk about J.K. Rowling. Like, come on, dude, be less obvious. I want to play.
Some stuff that was never alluded to in the books and makes absolutely no difference to the plots, but it just really...
The gay stuff of Dumbledore was alluded to somewhat in the later books with the whole, like, mentioning of the Grindelwald relationship. A lot of the other stuff that J.K. Rowling has said since, yeah, I'd agree with you, but I think of all things to bitch about, the Dumbledore gay thing is the weirdest.
ties in with weird gay politics. It's like, okay, that's cringe. Don't need to know. Don't explain your product. Don't explain your universal story after the fact. Just give me the thing. Let me figure it out for myself.
Do you feel the same way about George Lucas and all the shit he said about Star Wars since the 70s? Because there's a lot of it.
Engage in art in a non-linear way, that we can always like talk about something in new ways and in new light. We had, you know, the Matrix stuff was all like about the desire for transformation, but it was all coming from a closeted point of view. And so we had the character.
And she's even saying the thing that he's like, she should just say this. And she's like, yeah, this is from a closeted point of view. Like, Carl, everything you're saying and you're bitching about, no one's disagreeing with you. I don't even understand why you made this live stream.
Character of Switch, who was like a character who would be, you know, a
That's
man
what I'm
in the real world, and then a woman in the Matrix, and you know, that's both were where our headspaces were. I don't know how present my transness was in the background of my brain as we were writing it, but it all came from the same sort of fire that I'm talking about. And because trans people exist in this, especially for me and Lana, you know, we were existing in this space where the words didn't exist, so we were always living in a world of imagination. It's why I gravitated towards science fiction and fantasy and, you know, played Dungeons and Dragons. It was like, it was all about
Man, I want to play a
worlds.
D&D
And
game
so,
where the Wachowskis are the DMs. That'd probably be rad as fuck.
It freed us up as filmmakers because we were able to imagine stuff at that time that you didn't necessarily see on screen. Or even the idea of like, how can we exist in as many genres as possible? One of our things that we really enjoyed doing was like sort of genre bending, where you would have stuff that felt like kung fu movies and like anime and westerns. And then we always like loved this scene that Ned Beatty would do in this movie Network, where he would talk about the way the world was, and it was always from this like corporate hierarchical, you know, overlord structure. And so I think in our transness, we are always trying to, like, in queerness, like, incorporate as many things as possible. It's just like trying to...
So I was getting bored of listening to Lily there, so I was watching just the scenes as they were going past. And I honestly can't believe how well The Matrix has aged. It's still cool.
Sargon, are you gonna talk about how she's, like, not disagreeing with you at all? And that, well, these things were there and they were in the closet and they didn't necessarily have the words to put them, you know, on the page? That those themes are prevalent in part due to that? But she also said, hey, it's out there in the public now, it's not mine, it's yours, and you can have whatever interpretation. Basically making this entire hour, 40-minute live stream pointless because you're bitching about something that no one told you couldn't do. Are you just gonna ignore it and hope no one notices, you fucking idiot?
As fuck. You know, it's still, like, original. You know, it's still just really decent. But yes, that was Lily Wachowski claiming that...
That was Lily Wachowski completely blowing everything I've wasted your time saying for the last hour out of the fucking water, so...
Actually, it was always trans, even though we didn't know we were trans.
Yeah? Again, people who are in the closet and don't even necessarily understand that the word trans is what they are. still have those feelings and can put those feelings into art they make. But Sargon can't possibly be wrong. Of course.
So, how is the Matrix super trans? Writer Andrea Long-Chu, we went through this earlier. It wasn't really very enlightening. Visual aesthetics teacher.
Oh, Sargon.
Audiences want it.
You're wasting everyone's time with this one. I don't know what to